everybody, I am Kimberly Hall with UT-TSU Extension in Rutherford County, and today I'm going to be talking about Rabbits 101. Today the main topics we will discuss are breeds and housing. Breeds, housing, and supplies really. We will also briefly touch on nutrition, reproduction, and record keeping. Kind of some of the objectives of this presentation today are going to describe the different uses for rabbits, understand the importance of breed selection in relation to the intended use, understand the basic needs for housing in rabbits, and apply recommended practices when owning or raising rabbits. So some of the pros and cons of owning rabbits, rabbit production, that type of thing. Some of the pros are they are smaller, if we're talking from a livestock type subject. They are smaller, they are meat producing. You can raise these guys on small acreage. They can provide some supplemental income as well. Cons, you do have a predator risk, you have a high initial investment, high risk, and labor required. So let's touch on some of these. When we start talking about supplemental income, you can have some supplemental income from selling meat, as long as you can get all of your licenses and stuff done, or selling breeding stock, selling pets, that type of thing. Cons, when we have talked about that initial investment, you have the initial investment of cages and buildings and feeding and watering equipment, that type of thing. When we start talking about high risk, that is being able to get into that market, finding a facility that can process, if you're talking meat production, and being able to have a market for those if we're talking about this as a profitable type of business decision. So rabbit production, let's start off there. Where do you get started? Let's start with breed production or breed selection. I like to start with breed selection because there's some breeds that aren't going to work as well for different uses. So let's talk intended use. What are the uses for rabbits? We can show rabbits, we can have them for pets, meat, both personal or to sell, fur or wool, laboratory type use, and then what scale do we want to have it on? Remember, when we talk fur or wool, fur rabbits are going to have to be harvested for production. Wool, they do not. So wool production, those rabbits are just going to be shaved down. And when we start talking scale, are we wanting to go large scale, medium scale, small scale, or do we just want one or two for a pet? Or when we talk meat, we want this meat just for our personal use, or are we raising it for commercial type standards? And really with all of our uses, you know, are we fur or wool even, are we raising them just personal, or do we want to do it on a commercial type scale? So let's talk breeds of rabbits now. So when we talk our breeds of rabbits, we have three main categories. We have our meat breeds, our fur or wool breeds, and then our fancy breeds. When we start talking about our lab breeds, they're typically also going to fall into one of those other categories as well. Labs do typically use the Dutch breed or the New Zealand, and the reason that they use New Zealand's a lot is the processors prefer a white pelt, as it's easier to dye if they're going to use those as a meat type rabbit. So a lab's typically going to use Dutch, they're a smaller breed, or New Zealand. And New Zealand's more of a meat breed. And when we start talking about our meat breeds, our processors are going to prefer white pelts, as it's easier to dye. Whenever we talk about our most common breeds within these different categories, within the meat breeds, probably our two most common are going to be the Californian and New Zealand. Fur is going to be the Rex breeds. Any of the Rex breeds. Wool is going to be Angora breeds. And when we start talking fancy, those are going to be our door fur lock type breeds. The image here on the right is going to be a lion head. That's a small type breed as well. So breed selection kind of continued here. What are our best uses? So obviously, if we're looking at a little bitty Netherland dwarf like in the top picture here, not saying that you can't get any meat off of a Netherland dwarf, but if you're wanting meat production, that might not be the best option. So what are we wanting to use rabbit for? Are we just wanting a pet? We also need to look at what size rabbit fits best. A mature size in these different breeds can be 2.5 pounds up to 16 plus. So when we're looking at our intended use, that can help determine which breed. If we're looking for a pet, you might not want to get a small child a rabbit that weighs more than them as a pet. So that mature size is going to determine our cage space that's needed, so the size of cage, and then just the different uses within that. And then visual characteristics. I always talk visual characteristics. Obviously, we still need to select a breed that's going to be best for what we're wanting to use it for. But at the end of the day, if you don't like going out and looking at it every day when you're taking care of it and feeding and watering it, then that's probably going to deter you from really enjoying the hobby as much as you could. So why is breed selection important? Breed selection is important to fit the needs of the owner. Cage and building design, obviously, like we said, that little 2.5 pound rabbit's going to need have different cage requirements than what a 16 plus pound rabbit's going to have. Weight versus caretaker, we already talked about that in the slide before. It might be hard for a 16 plus pound rabbit to be carried around by a small child. Know the standards. So if you're showing or wanting to breed for the standards, know what your standards call for. The standards are printed by the American Rabbit Breeders Association every 4 years. That's going to detail each breed, what any disqualifications are, where the different point breakdowns are, that type of thing. And then grooming requirements. When we talk grooming requirements, different breeds are going to have different requirements. Those Angoras are going to require a lot more work and a lot more daily care than what say a New Zealand or a Netherland dwarf or something like that will. Okay, so that's all in breed selection. Let's talk about housing and supplies now. Housing and supplies, we want to talk about our building needs. So we can use an existing building. We can, an existing barn or building that's already on the property. If we're going to, now this is if we're going to have these rabbits outside of our home. If you have one pet rabbit, you may be keeping it just somewhere within your home, in a cage within your home. We also need to think about, are we going to have a climate controlled building? How are we going to have air intake? How are we going to keep ammonia levels down and the airflow throughout these? Predators, we want to make for sure we can keep predators out, whether this is a fence around the building, a building that is just completely enclosed, and lighting. It is recommended that breeding does need 14 hours of daylight to be at their peak production. And one thing to note on predators as well is predators can be a whole wide range of things, from dogs, cats, snakes, raccoons, possums. There's a wide array of different predators when talking about rabbit production. When we talk size of cage, size is going to depend on the type of rabbit. Of course, larger rabbits equal larger cages. And you want to make for sure that you always have, as far as your number of cages, make sure you have extra cages if you plan to breed. Different wire types, we want to pay close attention to our different wire types to help prevent sore hocks in our rabbits. We want a 14 to 16 gauge, half inch by 1 inch wire on the bottom. The baby saver kind of on the top can be a 14 gauge. It's going to be heavier and thicker. And remember, galvanized after is going to last longer. Type of cage, we're going to go through some different types of cages. One thing I want to note here is that hutches are harder to keep sanitary, and we'll talk about that more whenever we get to some different descriptions of cages on the next couple slides. So hutches are going to be the first thing we're going to talk about. These are going to be standalone, like you see in these pictures here. Majority are going to be a combination of wood and wire. No existing buildings needed. We do have some problems with sanitation and weather within these cages. Anywhere that there's wood, it's very hard to be able to sanitize those. Now, if you look at the image on the top right, where instead of having wood in those corners, it is T-post, and those wire cages are being held up by that. That does help with our sanitation. That allows us to be able to clean that. Whereas wood can be urine soaked, it's very hard to disinfect. Weather is another problem. these cages that are completely closed in, like this cage on the bottom left or in the center, in areas where it gets quite warm, those cages can be warm and a little too hot, not allow enough airflow or ventilation. Also, need to think of a way to minimize the rabbits if the wind's really blowing, the storm's coming in, that type of thing. Stacking with trays is another option. These can be used on all flooring. So if you have them inside, on concrete, on wood, you can still use these cages as well. They allow for multiple levels. The pans are pulled out for cleaning. They're easy to sanitize. Their pans can become heavy and rust if you're using metal pans. They do, however, make plastic pans as well, so that's another option. One thing to note here, though, is these pans are below the wire floor of the cage. Rabbits are able to back up to the wire and urinate outside of the cage, but you can get urine guards to put up to minimize this. And those urine guards just go along the edge of the cage so that if the rabbit backs up to the cage and urinates, it goes directly down into the pan versus out on the floor. And those are typically plastic or metal and can be sanitized quite easily. Hanging cages, these are going to allow for urine and feces to pass through the floor. So through the floor directly on the ground or into a trough type system like on the left can be flushed out into like a septic system. They're easy to sanitize and they do offer really good ventilation. Let's talk about some equipment now, watering equipment. All of these are going to have pros and cons. We can do automatic waters, we can do bottles, or we can do bowls. Multiple rabbits, if you have multiple rabbits in the same cage, make for sure that there's enough water for all that. We want to check for leaks. If we're using an automatic system or a bottle, make for sure that the water's not just running out of these. And we also, if we're using bowls, want to make for sure they're non-tip. Check the water every day, make for sure they're getting water. One of the worst things you can do is say, oh, there's water in the bottle, everything's fine on a hot summer day, and come back and that nozzle be stuck and that rabbit not be able to get water. And we want to make for sure we're providing them clean, fresh water as well. Feeding equipment, there's different options here. You can see there's more options than what's pictured here. You have our gravity flow feeders, like the two pictures, well, really three images on the left-hand side, or our bowls like on the right-hand side. Our gravity flow feeders are going to clip to the side of the cage. They also do make bowls that clip. We want to make for sure that we keep these clean, that if we're monitoring even these gravity flow feeders, make sure the rabbits are cleaning their feed up and that any old feed is being discarded up. Some additional supplies that may be needed are crates. These are transport crates, like in the bottom center, are really handy to transport to shows, transport to different locations, be able to use when sorting through rabbits, that type of thing. A grooming table or area, any type of a grooming area where you can get these rabbits out. You can medicate if you need to, you can look them over. Tattoo equipment. Putting a tattoo in the rabbit's ear is a very, very, very good way to identify them and be able to keep your records better. A nest box. If you're breeding rabbits, you're going to have some type of a nest box. Sleeves, like that bottom left-hand side. Rabbits have very, very, very powerful hind feet, and those claws can be really sharp and do some damage. Those sleeves just help protect your arm from getting scratched up. These are some of the main supplies. Additional supplies will most likely be needed, but these are just some of the main ones. Let's talk nutrition. Feed and water needs. We want to provide clean, fresh water, 16 to 18% protein pelleted feed. You can do supplements. The amount will vary, amount of feed will vary based on your breed, and you can do hay as well. Pregnant does and does with litters should receive full choice feed. You don't have to feed hay if you're feeding with a balanced pellet. Make for sure it's a balanced pellet though if you're not feeding hay. Wool breeds, hay is not recommended as it does get up in the wool and can hurt the value of the wool, make really bad knots, that type of thing. Reproduction. When we start talking about breeding, we want to keep accurate records. We want to watch our temperature, and we always want to take does to the bucks. So we want to take the does to the bucks cages or table breed them. You do not leave the rabbits together. You're going to let them breed, and then you're going to remove the doe and put her back in a cage. Remember that temperature can affect our bucks' willingness to breed and the doe's receptiveness. If you have a large-scale rabbitry, you may want to have a way to cool bucks down prior to breeding. You can take and just sit them in an air-conditioned room for about 30 minutes to an hour. That usually tends to do the trick. Remember, does are very territorial, which is the reason we want to take the does to the bucks instead of vice versa. And our medium type breeds are going to be ready to breed at about 5 to 6 months of age. Gestation, gestation is going to be about 31 to 32 days. They do make numerous different kinds of gestation calculators. Doing a quick Google search will help you find that. A nest box needs to be placed 28 days after breeding. There's numerous different apps as well and computer programs that will give you alerts when which cages are needing nest boxes placed. That doe should pull fur. She will pull fur from her belly and chest type region to make a nest within that nest box. The nest box here, you can use a metal box or a wood box. Shavings and hay, you typically put a layer of shavings and then fill that box with hay, and that doe will pull fur and go ahead and make a nest within that box. The size is going to depend on breed. A medium rabbit kind of standard size is about 18 by 12 by 12 with a low side in the front of 6 inches. That's kind of going to be for a medium sized breed. That's an 18 by 12 by 12 with a low front of about 6 inches. The nest box is to be removed when the kits are 21 days of age. With a new litter, we want to try to keep newbies out, especially when those does are kindling. We want to check those nest boxes for babies daily or twice daily. Immediately remove any dead babies. Check for full bellies. Make for sure the babies look like they're being fed. Remember that does do only typically feed twice a day, so you may not actually see them in the box. And you want to make for sure the box is staying clean and that the doe is not using the box for a litter box. Record keeping, I love this little meme here that says more paperwork and it looks like a baby screaming. I know we all hate paperwork, but record keeping is a very, very important aspect. You're able to keep pedigrees on the rabbits, know who's out of who, litter data, know who's producing, who's not producing, size of litter, date of last litter, health charts, any medications that have been given. These can be computer or handwritten. There's numerous different computer programs, apps for the cell phone, but you can do handwritten records as well. Just make sure you're keeping those in a safe place where they cannot get messed up or liquid spilled on them. Cage cards can be magnetic, dry erase, laminated plastic. They can clip on, stick on the side of the cage, slide into card holders, and those cage cards just allow you to look at, with a quick glance, know what rabbit's in that cage and all the information about them. Here's some different record keeping methods. You see those different clip-on cage cards, slide-in cage cards, pedigrees, just some different record keeping methods here. Culling and sorting. Whenever we talk about culling and sorting, this could be for sickness, lack of production, lack of quality. By culling, I don't just mean euthanizing or using for meat. These can also be, if they're lacking quality, maybe they could be sold as a pet, that type of deal. We need to remember that you can't keep them all. Certain breeds can have quite large litters, so we want to make for sure that we're not getting overran too fast, and that we have cage space for everything that we are keeping. That's all I have for today. If you need more information on rabbit ownership, you can contact me by email at khall58@utk.edu. Have a nice day.